Ladies and gents, we are live. Thank you very much for joining me. A newsflash, I haven't always been a lean bean, a little whippet. Not that I was ever hugely overweight. I was certainly not in the obese category. I don't have the most remarkable before and after transformation, sadly, on the internet. That would be good for marketing purposes and spreading the plant-based message, wouldn't it? But sadly, no. But I was up in my university years in the high 80 kilo range, 88, 89 kilos. I am now standing at, what will it be? 15, 16 and a half kilos lighter than that today. So there is a good bit of weight loss there, and undoubtedly a lot of that being body fat. And so I want to share with you today 3 of the reasons as to why at various points in my journey I was struggling to lose weight, struggling to lean down, in hopes that they will be of some value to you. Hopefully you're not making these same mistakes. If you are, you can immediately correct them, I hope, from the information that I'm going to share with you. I want to share with you not only the things that held me back, but also the solutions, how I overcome. Some of them were more testing than others. One of them in particular, something that plagued me for years and years and years, even when I had the right understanding on what to do for weight loss. And so hopefully covering some solutions here is going to be of great use to you. The first reason why I struggled to lean down was I was a big crash dieter. My methods for trying to lose fat before I discovered this plant-based methodology was so absurdly aggressive. And I know in the things that I'm about to share, I know there's going to be loads of you watching this at home just nodding your head like, yeah, I've done that, or I'm doing that right now. I know a bunch of you are going to resonate, but let me know down below how much this mirrors your story. But so aggressive with trying to lose fat that I would only ever just crash and burn. I'd crank the calories, whether I knew it or not at the time. My calories would be being driven really low. And what happened? Well, I'd just rebound right back up the scale after a couple of weeks. And that sort of ambition that I had when I was 20, 21, the dedication I could give to things, the time I had on my hands because I was still a student. I hadn't found my feet in the world yet. I didn't have to go and get a job at that point. And so I could dedicate a lot of time and mental energy to, Project Ryan, let's say, Project Healthy, Slim, Lean Body Ryan. But I did it with such ferocity and such aggressive extreme dieting, quote unquote, tactics, that even with all that ambition, all that commitment, all that free time, all that energy I could give to this, well, I would stay on track for a couple of weeks through sheer effort and willpower, when anyone that was spinning more plates in their life would have just been like, oh, this is ridiculous. I can't balance all these things. I'll just give up. But that free time and that energy I had when I was younger, I could give up my all to it. But it was such an aggressive, extreme strategy that I was adopting that we'd get a couple of weeks in and then I'd be flying back up the scale. I'd binge out. I'd just go crazy. I'd get all the Pop-Tart. I'd go to the store. I remember going to Asda back in York and Morrison's, wherever I used to shop at back in my student days. These are the cheaper places, the more affordable, let's say, places. If you're in the UK, you'll be like, yeah, I've been to those stores. And I'd go there because all the products were much cheaper than the M&S's and the Waitrose and whatnot. And I'd load up on junk food. I'd get loads. I'd get a whole box of Pop-Tarts. I'd get a tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Then I'd get some chips or some crisps for my fellow Brits, because I couldn't have too much sweet without then wanting something salty. So I'd get some chips. Then maybe I'd get a frozen pizza for myself if I wasn't ordering in from Domino's, like I've talked about many times. And all of a sudden, in front of me, I had 2,500, 3,000 calories. Now, it's not as though every time I would eat all of that, because I might get to the 2,000 calorie mark and make myself sick and then be like, oh no, I don't want any more food. Okay, I don't mean literally sick, but I'd be at the point where I felt slightly nauseous, felt crap, frankly, excuse my language, about myself, and I'd be like, okay, that'll do. But oftentimes I could just eat that food over the next couple of hours and I'd be binge eating and binge watching Lost or Prison Break or 24, Jack Bauer, CTU, whatever I was watching back then, when I clearly had way too much free time on my hands and not enough purpose in my life. And I would just eat all that food in one go or over the course of 3 or 4 hours. And this is after periods where I'd actually lose like 5 or 6 pounds. So I'd actually have some success on the scales, but it came at such a price, it came at such a cost. And the cost was that to get those 5 or 6 pounds in a couple of short weeks, I was doing something that was pretty darn aggressive. Whether I even knew, whether I even intended it always to be that aggressive is another question entirely. But matter of fact is I was doing very, very aggressive things. And of course, after driving my calories down so low, of course, my body was not only emotionally turbulent, but I was also physically hungry. So I had the ghrelin and the leptin didn't know what to do because the hunger hormones, because I'd just been semi-starving myself for a couple of weeks. And it gets to the point where it's absolutely ravenous, and it's so ravenous that I then could hardly control my appetite, and I wanted the most naturally, biologically, of course I was drawn to the most calorific foods, but then you combine that with the emotion of doing something so ridiculous, like being overly restrictive and starving myself, and in my mind, I had only lost 6 pounds in a couple of weeks, right? Whereas now I'm like, oh, that's really good. That's nice. That's really decent, speedy weight loss. But back then I'd be like, for all this effort, I'd only lost a couple of pounds. I still don't have the abs yet. So impatient, such an immediate gratification mindset that combined with the physical hunger, I was just like, screw this. I may as well have the cookies. Give me it all. Da, 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 da. And it was uncontrollable. And this cycle. Right, there's a lot of you're going to be nodding your head, perhaps embarrassingly so, but there's no shame in it because we've all done this. And that was the cycle for me. And that was what I was trapped in. I'm going to share how I got out of it in just a second. And I want to also say here, this was not my intention. Yes, sometimes I wanted speedy weight loss, but now knowing everything I know, I would never adopt those really extreme strategies again. And thank goodness I haven't since. And to get where I am today, to achieve the physique that I'm really quite happy with today, I haven't had to do those extreme things. I don't do those extreme things anymore, and I'm pleased to convey that message. And I really don't want you to think you have to either. There is a different way, and hopefully I'm showing it to you in these free videos here. It wasn't my intention, right? It wasn't my intention to cut out carbohydrates altogether. That's just what I was told by whoever I was watching on YouTube at the time. It wasn't my intention to only eat 1,600 calories a day, but I remember a period of time where I was programming on MyFitnessPal to eat 1,600 calories a day. As a very active 21-year-old that lived in the city of York at the time, that walked everywhere. I didn't count my steps back then. There wasn't apps for all of that stuff. I sound like an old man, but there wasn't, 10 years ago. And so I was walking around York and probably getting 6, 7, 8, 10,000 steps on some days. And so that's a lot of output in terms of energy expenditure. And then I was only eating 1,600 calories. But that wasn't my intention. I didn't think that I was going to crash and burn on eating 1,600 calories. I didn't think that it was a terrible thing to not eat carbohydrates. That's only what I think now that I know better. And so I just want to say, if you have adopted these extreme, very aggressive strategies in the past, or you currently are, I kind of get it. I get it. And I'm not going to come on here and lambast you for it unless you do very well know better. And then you'll get a bit of a guilt complex as I'm talking here. So if I'm talking to you, right? You'll be ashamedly nodding your head, perhaps. But I certainly didn't know better. This was just the information I was going off at the time. I thought you had to get rid of carbohydrates. I thought that all carbohydrates, even whole food sources, were fattening. I thought that to be in a calorie deficit, I had to cut carbs. Whereas now I know, oh no, there's many ways to achieve a calorie deficit. There's many ways to peel an orange, right? You don't just have to do it for a low carb methodology, but that's really what I thought. I didn't realize that you could actually be in a much higher calorie deficit and still see some weight loss and actually therefore feel a little bit more satisfied and full. And the whole process of losing body fat actually becomes a whole lot more tolerable and effortless because you're not eating as little as 1,600 calories a day, which, by the way, I should have said this earlier, 1,600 calories a day, that might not be a red flag for you. But again, for 5'11", 21 years old, very active young male at that time, who still had quite a bit of body fat to lose, might I add, rather than just a couple of pounds, that meant that my maintenance calories were significantly higher than 1,600 calories. And the point I'm trying to make here is, for a long while, for a couple of years on and off, I didn't know better. But facts are facts. Regardless of whether it was intentional or not for me to be so aggressive, whoever shoulders the blame for that, whether it's misinformation online, poor info, it's ultimately my responsibility. And I did learn gladly in time, happily in time. But whatever my reasons for adopting those extreme approaches, it always ended one way. I'd be rebounding back up the scale. I'd get so hungry that I had to binge. I thought it was normal that I felt like I had to have a cheat day, right? Everyone in the gym bro community was constantly talking about, oh, cheat day, what are you going to have for your cheat day? And I just thought that was normal. Whereas now, the word cheat day, I'm like, oh, that what a plonker I was back then for thinking or for resenting and struggling so much on my day-to-day nutrition plan that I had to pin all my hopes to eat whatever I wanted and throw out any nutrition structure and rules whatsoever, to pin all my hopes on one day where I could eat whatever I want. I can see now that's such an unhealthy frame to come from. If you hate your diet that much that you have to have a cheat day every week, a blowout, and that's how overall you stay consistent, well, I can see some value in that, but I was doing it to such an extreme degree. In fact, I used to call them refeed days, which is a principle I don't disagree with, the use of refeed days. But really, for me, it wasn't a refeed day. It was an all-out binge those cheat days turned into for me. In many cases where I'd reverse the calorie deficit that I'd worked so hard on the other 6 days of the week, right? And this is how it was ending for me, just this absurd crash dieting where I was getting so hungry, so ravenous. I remember at one point, I know this is slightly TMI, but I remember at one point in my third year of uni where for a couple of weeks, my libido just dropped hugely, immensely. And that's when I was like, okay, this has got to stop. And this is about 3 or 4 months before I went plant-based, incidentally. There was a couple of things I realized in my behavior that were like, I'm doing such aggressive stuff. Maybe I didn't consciously think this, but the seed was planted in my mind that I really wanted to stumble across something a little bit more sustainable this time, instead of this absurd sort of bulking and ridiculously aggressive cutting paradigm that you'll be familiar with if you've ever done the gym stuff, if you've ever been part of that community, right? Bulking and cutting, that's what they're always on about. It's just such a, there is an argument for that sort of philosophy, certainly if you're trying to build muscle, bulking and cutting. But the idea of doing it to such a degree that you gain a bunch of body fat and then you have to aggressively get that off. Again, I think the key here is moderation, which is a word that's perhaps overused, and most people's version of balance, I would argue, is not all that healthy. But I think when we're doing all this extreme stuff, like nothing wrong with a little bit of bulking and cutting mentality if you are trying to build some muscle. If you want to have phases throughout the year where you go from a perfectly slim physique to just leaning down a little bit and then understanding that's not always realistic. I don't think it's a terrible thing to bulk and cut over the course of years every now and again. But I would never advise doing it to a degree. This particularly applies to young men for whom this muscle building thing is constantly on their mind nowadays, it seems. TikTok hasn't helped that. Dirty bulking culture on YouTube and 10,000 calorie cheat days and that sort of thing, videos being made. That hasn't really helped on YouTube and whatnot with that. But this extreme dirty bulking where you put on a bunch of body fat and then you aggressively cut it off, like just be more moderate with it. And then you're only ever having to lose or gain a couple of pounds, and it's far more manageable, and you can do it with a far more patient, sustainable attitude. Anyway, long story short on this crash dieting thing, you can see how this held me back, because I'd go through periods where I'd lose a bit of body fat, but was there any major breakthrough? Was there anything that was actually sustainable? Of course not, because I had done it through, it's kind of like that argument, philosophical argument now of like a means to an end, or no, that's not what I'm looking for. What's the catchphrase? What's the mantra? No, it is means to an end. Whereas now I look back and I'm like, no, like you need to reverse engineer the results in a manner that is actually going to be the right manner for you and healthful and sustainable to you. Whereas I was kind of seeing my dieting phases as a tool to get the body I wanted, and it made me in such a hurry and such a rush, and it made me so eager to just try like crazy things I heard on the internet because I was desperate for that speedy transformation. So anyway, the solution to all this crash dieting nonsense for me, what did I do to break myself out of this? Well, needless to say, it took years. I had to do it enough times to realize, sadly, the pitfalls of it and then go, okay, I've probably got to stop doing this, right? It's a shame, but sometimes you have to make the same mistake over and over before your brain goes, or consciously you go, okay, Ryan, you plonker, you donut, let's stop doing this thing that clearly hurts you. And then sometimes it's a case of not knowing better. You just don't hear a better argument than, just do this aggressive cutting and bulking thing all the time. I just didn't hear a better argument for a long time until plant-based diet started going boom on the internet in about 2015, 2016, and so on. So the solution to this for me, number one, a more moderate calorie deficit. which is something nowadays, not that I'm looking to lose fat anymore, but nowadays something I'm far more cognizant of. If I did want to dial it in, chisel down a little bit, rather than having what was probably for me back then an 800 calorie deficit, I'd start out at more like 350, 400. And for women, my female clients, I advise even less. I put them on a far lower calorie deficit. And this is far more moderate. And yes, it gets slower results, but the question of longevity and sustainability, right? There's no comparison. I'm totally okay now with slower results if I know I'll still have those results in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months time. Makes sense? Rather than back then, it was just, this was me on the scale. It was, and it was no more than a couple of weeks that I could sort of maintain abs coming through. And even then, it just wasn't under my control. It wasn't under my spell, and it wasn't effortless enough for me to actually stick to. Makes sense? So that was the solution for me to crash dieting, or part of the solution was now being more cognizant of having a much less aggressive, much more conservative calorie deficit and going slower with things. And that's a nice segue into the second thing that got me out of crash dieting. I actually genuinely could accept slower results. I was actually cool with it rather than being sort of 2021 and just instant gratification. I wanted them now. I wanted to shred down now. I wanted to look and feel good now, rather than thinking, okay, there's a result I want here, but now I know that there's certain things I'm not willing to do to get that result. And ultimately, hopefully I'm on this planet for a bunch more decades. What do I really want here? What's really the hurry here? If I get to my dream body in 1 year versus 2 years, when I've got another couple of decades, hopefully, on this planet, well, there's no comparison, is it? Right? I'd snap your hand off, to stay on the journey a little bit longer if it guaranteed, results further into the future. That's fine. I'll happily make the sacrifice now. I'll happily be more patient now to be in with a shot of having those results for much longer in my life. Does that make sense? Now, of course, I didn't know this at the time. I simply didn't know better. But after doing crash dieting enough, after failing with it enough, after watching myself fly back up the scales and rebound enough and binge out because I've been starving myself so many times, I started to think, okay, ultimately, there's a certain type of way that I want my physique to look. There's a certain very tangible and intangible way that I want to feel about myself, vibrant and thriving and mobile and active and fit. And some of those things are very measurable. Some of those things are slightly more abstract. But there is a vision I've got for myself here. Who cares if it takes 6 months versus 9 months? Who cares if the journey's a little bit more slow? Because I'm going to hopefully have those results for life, right? I'm happy to pay the price. I'm happy to do my penance. I'm happy to do my time and take a little bit longer to get something I can more realistically stick to and keep for the long term. So I just became okay with having slower results. I just got over that incessant need to lose 2-3 pounds a week. And I just got more chilled about it. And I still was observant over the scale. I still made a note of what the scale was doing. I still created a results-oriented mindset. I still would get disappointed, understandably so, if I plateaued from 1 week to the next. But there wasn't this crazy impatient urgency that was driving me to think, okay, now siphon off another 100 calories. Okay, let's do it more aggressive. Oh, maybe I need to I've already cut the carbs at dinner and lunch. Maybe I need to cut the carbs at breakfast too. Whereas now I'm just, if I want to chisel down, if I want to lean down, way more chilled about it, way more accepting that, okay, because of this new philosophy, Slim and Sustain, right? The clue's in the name of this program. Because of this more sustainable philosophy that I want to embody here, that I try to brainwash myself with, the results are going to be a little bit slower. And that's perfectly fine. I learned to accept that. I learned to accept that I don't need to be lean for a holiday if for the next holiday I'm completely out of shape because I worked so hard to get lean just for one holiday. And that's all I cared about. And that was the finish line in my mind, excuse me. Does that make sense? So that was part of the solution. The other solution for me for crash dieting was this. Just realizing, I think I've covered this, but some of my notes, I'm just going on my notes just to mention some more succinct way of putting it. Just realizing that my impatience never really got me permanent results. Like I said about 10 minutes ago, sometimes you need to make the same mistake over and over again before you say to yourself, oh, that's a mistake. Now, Of course, in the ideal world, I'd have a much higher IQ. I'd have far greater pattern recognition. I'd be a far more self-aware person, and I'd spot the mistake the first time I did it, and I'd be able to reflect on it then, and then integrate the lessons I learned from that mistake much faster. But sadly, it was kind of years of on and off through 18, well, let's say 19 through 21. I got into the gym about 18, but 19 through 21, where I was doing this on-off crash dieting and going from gym bro diet to paleo to doing something more flexible dieting based if it fits your macros. That whole period where I was really started to get really super obsessed with my health, but could never really master it. That's kind of the period I think of. I think looking back, it's like, wow, you dum-dum, right? You dum-dum. There was so many errors staring at you in the face. But I think I just got to the point by about 21 where I was like, okay, this is doing nothing for me. I just got to that breaking point where I could have just left it and been like, oh, I don't care about my health anymore. I'm not going to try. I'm a big boredom eater, really struggling with the cravings. I always go up and down the scale. I have a bit of success, but it never really gets anywhere. I could have easily taken my foot off the gas, but rather I just got to the point where I was like, no, there has to be something more sustainable here. And how much of a conscious thought that was to me at 21 when I sort of started thinking this way. Well, yeah, I'm thinking this way. Of course, to a degree, it must have been a conscious thought. But I think it started as I just started to recognize this pattern of, okay, this really isn't serving me now. This really isn't helping. It's not getting lasting results. What on earth am I going to do here that has a bit more longevity to it? And then you all know about me discovering plant-based eating then shortly thereafter. The other thing that got me out the crash dieting thing that I haven't really touched on so far is I started to care. I remember at about 21, and I'd gained a bunch of fat from this whole bulking nonsense, and I put on some muscle. And I had parents, thank goodness, and loved ones, people that were close enough to me to have the gall to say this, saying, Ryan, yeah, you have built a bit of muscle, mate. You look a lot more bulky. You look bigger. You're obviously stronger. Good for you. But, mate, look at the acne. You've gained a bunch of fat. Look at your face now in terms of the acne and the excess fat gain. Haven't you taken this too far? People seeing how much meat I was eating, how many processed foods at times I was eating in the flexible dieting era, and saying, right, come on, mate, don't you think you've pushed this a bit far now? You've done well, but don't you think you've pushed this a bit far? And I think at first I was like, no, you're a hater, screw you. I don't remember ever saying that, but that was probably how I was internalizing it. Like, oh, well, whatever, I'm going to carry on with my thing. But in time, I did think, yeah, these people got a point. And so what happened to me, I remember at about 21, I started to, for one reason or another, but I think largely because of this feedback, I started to care less about my physique and more about health. And I was still very vain, as I still admittedly am today. I think we all have that, right? But I was still very vain at 21. That didn't suddenly change as I turned into health guru wannabe, no. But I started to think, okay, there's a healthful way to go about this now. Rather than, I was purely focused on the aesthetics to a degree where the health was very sacrificial. I wasn't thinking about blood work. I wasn't thinking about cholesterol. I didn't even necessarily know what cholesterol was at 21. And then I started sort of getting into the health thing and thinking, no, it matters how you perform. And I do care about my well-being. It's not as though I didn't before, but everything was sacrificed for the physique. And I think that being less needy about how my physique looked meant that I could come from, again, more of a health and wellness attitude, I'm going to feed myself what's actually good for me attitude, longevity. And this, again, allowed me to start pushing away the more extreme and aggressive crash dieting strategies that I was following before, because I realized, well, these aren't actually good for my health. And they might briefly, get my physique up to scratch, but only very briefly, of course. But for my health and general well-being, this is too extreme. This is too crazy. It's too yo-yo with the calories. That's not good for my metabolism. That's not good for me hormonally. I'm losing libido, for crying out loud. Hormonally, that's really, really a sign that things aren't right in a 21-year-old male, for goodness sakes. So let's stop this. And I think, again, we're talking about a period of my life where little seeds over a couple of months were getting planted. Okay, I need to find something different here. And then later, of course, I did. So that's the first reason why, in summary, I struggled to lose fat back in the day. I was just hooked on this crash dieting cycle, didn't know how to escape it, and it was really tough, really challenging, but gladly I can speak to you today and I can tell you that I have broken through. Thank you, Mike. That's very kind. Looking jacked in the thumbnail. Are you saying I don't look jacked in the video, Mike, just in the thumbnail? Oh, I'm only messing with you, mate. Thank you very much. Yeah. No, just generally feeling really, really great. This summer, I've just felt great. I've been happy with my body weight for all the years that I've run this channel, to the degree where I have the boldness, confidence, audacity, arrogance, whatever you want to term it, to want to share, the tips that have worked for me here and talk about what I think works, what I think is a good formula for success online, right? I've been happy and proud enough of my physique to put content out to help other people with theirs. However, just in the last couple of months, I've felt the best I've ever felt. I felt lean, I felt fit, I felt mobile, I felt happy. It's been a really good summer. The last couple of weeks with this house move and various other things have been pretty stressful. But generally, I feel really great right now. So thank you, Mike. I'm glad it's visible externally as well as feeling good internally. See, there's that vanity once again. Like, we care about that, right? Of course we do. The second reason now, number 2, as to why I struggled to lose fat back in the day was cravings. And this feeds a lot into the crash dieting, but just cravings. And I talked about being a big boredom eater, at uni. It was this restlessness for me, right? I'd just be sitting at home or in the library doing self-study, and I'd get overwhelmed by an essay, or I'd be underwhelmed by, a certain module. So I studied business, and within business is a very broad subject. I'd have to do things that were of less interest to me, things like finance and accounting, things like economics. Economics, for a brief period when I had a good teacher, was actually very interesting to me for 6 months or so. But generally, I was taking lots of modules under the business umbrella that I wasn't really enjoying that much, and they didn't stimulate me. And I remember times where I'd be sat in the library and the vending machine or the university shop is, 250 yards away, and just being completely uninspired by what I was doing, or on the opposite side of things, which isn't boredom eating, but feeling slightly overwhelmed by the fact that I was late for a deadline, because I was certainly not the more motivated Ryan Adams that I am today. I was a lot lazier, I regret to admit, back then. And so just sort of freezing up that I'd left myself last minute to do a 3,000-word essay, and be it far easier to just go and get some food to numb that rather than face that reality of, okay, you've got this essay to write, Ryan. And of course, this didn't solve anything, because I still had to go and write that essay, which I was clearly unprepared for, and therefore, I'm sure, didn't get as good a grade as I could have back then. Somehow, I ended up doing relatively well at university, but it's because I had enough subjects that were entertaining to me. But generally, feeling sort of slightly uninspired, slightly unstimulated. I didn't get a part-time job at university until my 3rd year, which in hindsight, that was brilliant for me. But in hindsight, that was a mistake. I wish I'd got myself a part-time job in years 1, 2, not just from a work experience perspective, not just from a financial perspective, but also just to engage my brain. So I wasn't just sitting at home or sitting in the library bored with too much time on my hands. And ultimately, this took me from not having a terrible relationship. I didn't have a terrible relationship with food in my younger years. I think my parents overall were fantastic with me and my brother, in terms of, especially my mother, trying to give us some healthy habits. Wasn't perfect, but trying to give us some healthy habits. It was really only when I went off to uni that I started to, get really, really bad cravings and get hooked on certain foods. And, I didn't have those home cooked meals. I was left to do my own thing. And, just progressively, there was no one turning point, but progressively, I just got hooked on more and more junk food I was allowing myself, under the guise, I think, of, dirty bulking at times, but I started to allow myself to have a bit more food. And then there were times where it was totally uncontrollable, and I couldn't even justify it with, trying to build muscle and dirty bulk. It was, I am bored, I am emotional, I'm going to get something to eat here because I'm not really enjoying, some of my studies. And that, I'm so pleased to report back that now have fixed that area of my life. After I graduated, I went and got a job that I did for many years that overall I enjoyed very, very much and was taken good care of by a company and had great people around me. And even though ultimately long-term that wasn't the right fit for me, because I had to come and do this, right? I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to talk about this stuff for a living. But ultimately, that first job was brilliant for me because I didn't have all this time on my hands every day where I was twiddling my thumbs and feeling uninspired. And so that halved the amount of cravings I had overnight. Overnight, from July to August, whenever I finished university I went straight into work. I didn't have a gap year or go traveling or any of that nonsense. I thought, no, I'm getting straight to work here. And immediately my cravings halved. They immediately went away. And that's how I realized for me, because at the time I didn't have the language, the labeling, the self-awareness to designate myself as an emotional eater, to say, hey, Ryan, you've got a cravings problem here. I didn't even think of the word cravings. It wasn't even on the tip of my tongue. I couldn't even articulate what my relationship with food was like back then. I knew it wasn't right. I knew it wasn't healthy, but I couldn't really call it out necessarily, or I couldn't really describe the behavior pattern enough to try and analyze it and do something about it. And then a couple of months later, when I went off to the world of work, I was like, oh, okay, it's because I was kind of bored, and it's because I wasn't really stimulated and I wasn't really challenged, and I had too much free time on my hands. Whereas now I'm like, oh, I'd love a little bit more free time. But back then I had too much free time on my hands, and it was leading me to twiddling my thumbs and looking for food as something to do for engagement. Now, maybe this particular point of sort of boredom eating doesn't necessarily relate to you, but maybe there's something similar happening for you. Maybe it's stress-based eating. Maybe you resonate with the story of overwhelm that I told earlier on. Maybe it's this sort of reward dynamic. Oh, I deserve a treat. I deserve a pick-me-up. I've had a really hard, stressful day, or I've had actually a successful, good day, so I want food to reward myself, to pat myself on the back, because historically that's how I've celebrated things, with food. So now I'm stuck in that dynamic. Like, I've experienced all of this stuff, but for me the big thing was I was bored. It was boredom eating that was particularly triggering those cravings for me. So how did cravings hold me back from losing fat and leaning down? Well, I'd have periods where, as I talked about earlier on, that solid willpower would enable me to say no left, right, and center to things. When people would offer me a slice of pizza, I could say no. When people would say, hey, do you want to go out and party, Ryan? For periods, I could very easily say no to those things. But the cravings were there, they were underlying, and after a week or two, they would surely rear their ugly head. Whereas now I can safely say that if I absolutely had to, this is not to say I'm always perfect with my diet, and I'm always conscious of setting that as a precedent for people here watching, but I can easily now go a month, if I had to, without touching a single bit of archetypical junk food, I suppose. What do we call junk food or processed food? You might suggest that, what do I have here? You might suggest that oat flour, for example, is highly processed food. It is technically processed, but I could easily go a month if I needed to without oat flour, and it's not really an overt junk food like burgers, for example. I could do that. I couldn't have done that years ago. And it's because I would have these underlying cravings, and I had these needs in my life that I wasn't meeting. And even though I didn't understand why at the time, that was dragging me towards food. Excuse me, folks, I feel like I'm about to sneeze, excuse me. Probably because I'm wearing a sleeveless tank at the start of winter here in the UK, which would never be advised. And my heating isn't even on because I literally just got home from visiting my parents. No, it's gone. We're safe. We're good. It's gone. So yeah, the cravings were just underlying to the extent that, yeah, I might be able to fight my way through via vigorous willpower. I might be able to fight my way through, a couple of weeks of a healthy, wasn't healthy at the time in hindsight, but healthy meal plan. But those cravings, they would rear their ugly head, or I'd quickly, feel unstimulated or unengaged by something I was doing at university. And I just want to go and get food. And that made it so much harder. And then, like I say, these are all different periods within a 3-year. These are all different phases within a 3-year period. I don't want to mix them all together. But you can imagine, combine those food addictions and those food afflictions and very strong cravings with, and the boredom eating and whatnot, that boredom dynamic and not feeling 100% in my life. And so looking outside of myself and For many people, their vice is alcohol or drugs. For me, it was cigarettes. For me, it was food. That was my vice of choice. That was my soothing coping mechanism, let's say, rather than dealing with the reality of, okay, Ryan, maybe go and get a job, maybe throw yourself into things, maybe actually do your work on time and actually start on time. And then you won't always be playing catch up and getting yourself worked up and stressed and overwhelmed and then going and just eating. I digress. What was I just saying? But food, anyway, was my choice of vice. And excuse me, folks, I've just lost my train of thought. What was I saying before all of that? I don't know. I open all these branches and loops in the conversation, and I can't even remember what it was to go back to. But yeah, the cravings, ultimately, they were just always there lingering. Whereas now, I feel good in myself. I feel in control. I feel my relationship with food is in so much of a better place that the cravings just aren't as frequent or as prevalent for me. They do happen. I'm a human, but they aren't as frequent or as strong for me nowadays. So how did I overcome these cravings then? What did I do to actually get rid of them? You've heard the before and after. I've given you examples how strong I feel now in terms of cravings and how bad I felt back then. Well, how did I get from A to B then? How did I actually do that? Well, the first thing was I realized that this sort of flexible dieting approach that I was adopting at various points in those 3 years from 18, 19 through 21 at university, I realized it wasn't actually fixing my relationship with food. And it wasn't actually fixing my relationship with food because I still have a rationalization. I could still justify eating junk. Because I don't know how familiar you are with the flexible dieting methodology, but most flexible dieting teachers, they say, aim for 70 to 80% of your diet to be whole foods, and then leave, another 20 to 30% there as wiggle room to fit things into your diet, to fit them into your macros and your calories, even if it's junk food. And this is something that I think flexible dieting can be a wonderful stepping stone for people. I don't think it's all bad. I don't think it's that binary. There are some wonderful vegan and plant-based dieting, flexible dieting coaches, and teachers online. And I think overall they're doing a wonderful job. And I agree with 95% of what they say. But my qualm with flexible dieting, as somebody that got stuck with it for years, is that I could never get over my food addictions and afflictions because through the flexible dieting approach, I always could rationalize to myself fitting my favorite, really the foods I was very weak to, that's what I mean by favorite, into my diet. I still had an excuse to have a bit of Pop-Tart here and there, to have a bit of Ben & Jerry's ice cream here and there, to fit a bit of pizza in. Oh, it's flexible dieting. Overall, my diet's clean, so I can throw a few things of these in. Now, there is, again, genuine, sincere, good advice behind what some keyword flexible dieting teachers say. I do think this can be a wonderful stepping stone. I do not think that one's diet needs to be absolutely Puritan perfect to see fantastic results. I do not think the occasional vegan burger, the occasional G&T, I shook my glass like I've got G&T in here. I can assure you I don't. The occasional bit of cake, the occasional bit of vegan Ben & Jerry's ice cream, for example, that wouldn't ruin results. I could have those things from time to time nowadays. I eat out occasionally now, once a week or so now. It doesn't ruin my results. It's not enough to totally derail me. But flexible dieting teachers, most of them, they're not advising one meal out per week. They're not talking about the occasional G&T every couple of weeks, which is about the frequency with which I drink alcohol now. They're not taught versus in my student days, but we're going to come to that in just a second, actually. A hint about what reason number 3 is. But flexible dieting teachers, they're saying 70% of your diet whole foods. So what, the rest can be junky stuff if you want it to? For me, that's too big a margin. That's way too big a margin. And this is why I had such strong cravings for years, or it's part of the reason why I battled with cravings for so long for years, is because I was still eating foods that I had a weakness for, that I had an affliction for, and I could maintain those bad habits. Yes, there were rules about how much of that food I could eat, because then I would compromise the sort of, if it fits your macros, the maximum calorie limits and that sort of thing. And sometimes I'd just binge. So I'd have that bit of Pop-Tart intending to eat one Pop-Tart because it would fit into my 2,500 calories for the day. I'd have one and then I'd be like, because I felt out of control at that time, or I was eating for other reasons besides hunger, naughty, like I say. And so, this flexible dieting approach didn't really allow me to fix my relationship with food. In fact, I argued that it actually made my relationship with food worse. I actually argue my relationship with food was a lot better before I even stumbled across flexible dieting because it gave me an excuse to eat poorly. Now, you could say that it was my fault for adopting flexible dieting and for taking it too far, and I should have recognized that in myself and taken responsibility. But I do hold flexible dieting generally to account for that as well, for me having a bad relationship with food, even if I should have seen that it was going that way. I'm still responsible, but I just don't like the flexible dieting method for this reason, because I saw with myself that it would allow me to rationalize and justify still eating bad things. And you will know, as somebody that may well have struggled with junk food in the past, or even presently, maybe there's certain foods that constantly take you off track despite 80% of your diet being really good, and that's the reason you can't lose fat. You will very well know that sometimes when it comes to talking about food addictions and addictions is a strong word, let's say food afflictions too, or emotional eating, you will very well know that it's not about a taste as much as we think. It's more about familiarity. Have you noticed when you binge eat, or when you want to eat out of emotion, let's say, when you engage in emotional eating, have you noticed that you actually only go for the same 3 or 4 foods, maybe even down to a very specific brand? Because there's so many junk food options out there. There's so many different types of takeout you can get on Uber Eats or on your phone now. So much food you could just order online and it'll be at your door in 45 minutes if you live in a very relatively built-up area. So much types of junk food in the aisles on your nearest grocery store. So many options. But why, when you binge eat or you emotionally eat, do you just go to 2 or 3 different things? Have you noticed that? Maybe you're the one person, maybe you're the anomaly, and you do have a variety of junk food when you emotionally eat or you binge. But for most binge eaters, that isn't the case whatsoever. And for me, it was very specific. It was Pop-Tarts, down to the certain kind of Pop-Tart. It was Ben & Jerry's, but it had to be Ben & Jerry's cookie dough. I remember once, about 2021, I remember exactly the house I lived in. So I was 21, I think, or I turned 21. And I remember I went to Sainsbury's. That was the nearest store for me. I went to Sainsbury's, and I remember they were out of Ben & Jerry's cookie dough, and I was in a bingy mood. And I was like, I really want the cookie dough. And so they had fish food. They had Ben & Jerry's fish food, which I don't even know what flavor that is, but it's got the little chocolate fishies in. I don't know why it's called fish food. I think that's shocking marketing. But anyway, that's by the by. So I got this fish food, got home, had 2 bites of it. All of a sudden, that binging desire was gone because it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. That ice cream, it wasn't the same, right? I wanted the Ben & Jerry's cookie dough. Isn't that interesting psychologically what happened there? And for me, for a long time, I've known that for me, emotional eating, binge eating, for me, it was more about familiarity than it was taste. And this is profound, so I'm going to say it again in a grandiose manner, not to call my own advice profound, but I think this is a really key point that I want to highlight, hence why I'm repeating it. For me, my food afflictions were more about familiarity and patterns and routine, because that's what's comfortable to us, right? When we're emotionally not 100%, than it was about taste. I loved the cookie dough, but I also loved the routine and the expectation of the cookie dough. It was safe because I knew I liked it. Fish food, I'm sure, is very popular as a Ben & Jerry's ice cream. But as soon as I tasted that it wasn't the beloved cookie dough that I had eaten 40 to 50 times in the year prior, no doubt, whilst watching my favorite show, and then I sit down and watch my favorite show, whatever it was at the time, and eat fish food, it's not the same. It's not the same pattern. It's not the same routine. And we love routine because it's safe, because it's comfortable, because I had mistakenly sold myself on the illusion that me eating Ben & Jerry's cookie dough would stop me feeling bored, would stop me feeling unfulfilled, like I spoke about earlier, right? And so I've lost the thread at where I came from this whole spiel from. I'm sorry, folks. But for me, just relating it back to flexible dieting, that didn't cure my relationship with food because I could constantly justify still having those foods that I used to emotionally rely on, still have the cookie dough out of safety, out of comfort, out of routine, out of familiarity. I had mistakenly told myself that those things were the cure to my boredom. They weren't. I finished the ice cream. My life was still the same. It didn't fix anything. I just really needed to sit there, process that emotion, and then go, oh, I should actually do something with my life. And then I won't be so bored. I should actually fix something. I should take some action. Then I won't be so bored. The only action I took was to numb myself with, a Netflix show and then eat some ice cream or a Pop-Tart, whatever the designated, junk food affliction was at the time. And so it was this pattern, it was this routine. And through flexible dieting, I could still justify eating some of these things that I was, binging and emotionally eating. Of course, I was never going to fix my relationship with food because I was constantly introducing that food back into my body again. My mind was going through the process of eating that food, feeling weak to it. I was subcommunicating to myself, oh, I can still keep eating this food and it's not going to harm me. Absolute nonsense. So how did I overcome my cravings? I had to let the flexible dieting approach go because it was keeping these foods that I had a weakness to far too familiar. The taste of them, the chemical release, the dopamine hit, the expectation of, oh, I get to eat X food today. Flexible dieting gave me too much justification to stay stuck in these cycles, eating the foods that I had affliction or was frankly addicted to, as dramatic as that sounds. So, segue, how did I overcome my cravings? Well, abstinence. Abstinence really helped me get over a lot of these food addictions and afflictions. I could break those patterns of behavior. I could take something like the Ben & Jerry's cookie dough or the strawberry Pop-Tarts I used to love. I could take them off the proverbial pedestal that they were on in my mind, and I could actually give myself a chance to live without them for a couple of weeks. And it's amazing, as soon as I did that, and even though it's hard to go cold turkey, as soon as I did that and I got through those couple of weeks that are pretty hard when you've got really strong cravings, but then bang, you get to the promised land where after a couple of weeks, the taste buds start to adjust. The gut bacteria starts to shift. You yourself mentally, you start to forget about the foods because we're so routine, you see. So when you introduce a new routine, you quickly forget about the old ones. It's amazing how the mind works. It's a weapon for both good and for evil at the same time in that regard. Because once you get hooked on new habits and new routines, you can forget about the old ones. But because you do get hooked on habits and routines, if you instill the wrong habits or routines, you're in a whole world of trouble because it's so hard to break yourself out of that cycle and it becomes so familiar and comforting to you. So after a couple of weeks of abstinence, of saying, right, no more Pop-Tarts, no Ben & Jerry's, no Domino's pizza orders, let's get rid of the takeout menus. Let's delete the Domino's pizza York number from my phone, right? That was amazing because it made me so much stronger. And it was effortless as well. It wasn't effortless. Me becoming stronger with food became effortless, is what I mean very specifically, because I just wasn't introducing those foods. So I didn't see them as an option anymore. So they start to come off the pedestal. I start to realize, oh, it's not the Pop-Tart that I actually need in my life. I need to just go and do things with my life, and then I'm happy. I don't need food to be happy, right? I don't need food to quell the boredom. I just need to have a life that limits the boredom as much as you realistically can. Boredom's a part of adult life, I suppose. But I just need to go and do things that stop me from feeling bored. And then I'm not looking outside of myself for food to be engaging or to provide entertainment or to soothe or stuff or whatever it is. And that was a lovely feeling. And like I say, it was virtually effortless after the first couple of weeks because I just wasn't being introduced to those foods anymore. For me, they weren't an option. So abstinence is something that hugely deserves credit for my being able to get over cravings. Rather than this flexible dieting approach, rather than doing 6 good days and then having one bingey day, having cheat meals and that sort of thing, I said to myself, right, you're going cold turkey. We're going hardcore with this and it's going to be tough, but I need to do this. And it quickly got me over those foods. I quickly forgot about those foods and my taste buds started to appreciate whole natural foods with a little bit of seasoning. That's all I needed. And I started to really love those foods. And of course, they tasted initially very bland because I was used to all this artificial stuff. I was used to the narrative that I had to have something sweet after dinner. So I had to get over that. And, for a couple of weeks, that's hard work. Your body's screaming at you like, right, aren't we having Pop-Tarts anymore after dinner? Aren't we having a big bowl of Crave or Cookie Crisp cereal every day? What's this bran flakes thing, right? What's this? What, you're having oatmeal again, right? You're having muesli? Come on, give us some, naughty cereal. Give us some really refined, sugary, chemically messed around with stuff. But once you get through that period where your body's like, give us some stuff, you do genuinely get my clients will attest to this, I hope, you genuinely get to this promised land where it's so much easier to stay consistent. And hopefully there's your light at the end of the tunnel there. So abstinence was a game changer for me. And it's not to say that I've maintained that abstinence, for the last 8-9 years, whatever I've been plant-based, 8 years. I'm very candid about it. I show the photos and whatnot on my Instagram. I put it here on YouTube. You've just seen the Texas road trip vlogs, right? I am not perfect with my diet all the time, but I'm still enough of my diet is centered around whole plant foods, 95% plus whole plant foods, to where my taste buds can never get too corrupted anymore. My brain chemistry can never get that dopamine hit regularly that it did when I was constantly having junk food in my life under the guise of flexible dieting or dirty bulking or because I was bored. And so it's so much easier now to stay on track. It's so much easier to, when I have like a passing thought or a temptation or a craving, to be like, no, I don't need that. I don't want that. It doesn't linger on my mind as much anymore because it's been a while since I've eaten that food. Right? It's been months, maybe, since I've had a bit of chocolate cake. And so it's easy for me to be like, no, I don't want chocolate cake. Whereas if you're having chocolate cake every day, it's constantly on your mind. You train your body and your brain to expect that chocolate cake. It's very hard to start saying no to it. So abstinence is so tough at first, but I can't speak of how rewarding it's been for me. The final thing that really, really helped me with cravings is knowing that I got cravings when I had this feeling of restlessness. And that restlessness was usually caused by me not meeting a need in another area of my life. So I've already spoken about the boredom. It made me itchy. It made me want to grab food because I was so bored of my routines. I was so unstimulated by what I was doing at university, in my university years, or much of my university years, especially my second and third years, to where I just want to go and grab food. And I got like itchy and frantic and urgent. And that's the kind of energy you have when you're about to emotionally eat, right? Physical hunger is a slightly different feeling. And so what I now look back and realize is I didn't have a food problem. And I've used food addiction. I've used the word afflictions today. I've used the word emotional eating today. I've described myself as being a binge eater in the past today. And those things, they do stand true in my mind. That's why I said them, right? But what I now look back at and I realize, first and foremost, I didn't have a food problem. I had problems in other areas of my life that I wasn't addressing. They were manifesting as food. I was leaning on food as my chosen coping strategy. Does that make sense? And that's how I overcome my cravings. I realized when I was forced to actually go out and get a job, I realized just how much of my eating habits was simply a result of emotions that I hadn't properly channeled or I hadn't properly listened to, and I hadn't let guide me to actually make a change in my life. So my call to action for you, if I'm in a position to give it, would be this. If there's a common source of stress in your life, go and try and fix it. Is there anything you can do to alleviate that stress? If you resonate with what I've said about boredom eating, go and fix it. What can you do to fix that boredom? Are you sitting at home every evening and then therefore turning to food as something to do, when if you gave yourself a hobby, if there was a group or a club, an exercise class that you could do a couple of times per week, if you made an effort to hang out with friends more, well, that would actually give your brain the engagement that it's currently missing, and you wouldn't be looking around like, what's in the fridge? I've got nothing going on tonight. I need some entertainment, some stimulation here for my brain. No, go and do things in the world. And that would be my call to action for you. If any of what I've shared here on cravings and emotional eating has resonated whatsoever, please go out now and think, right, is there anything I can immediately start changing in my life so I don't constantly look outside of myself for food to do something for me? And it's amazing how that will halve your cravings overnight when you start to fix those things. Cravings is a battle, right? You can still fix those things and have problems, but this is going to set you on the path to success. So what I now look back and realize is I didn't have a food problem necessarily. It was manifesting as a food problem. The problem was I wasn't 100% happy and 100% fulfilled. And as soon as I started to address those things, whether coincidentally or intentionally, for me, it was coincidentally, I just finished uni. I had to go and get a job. But as soon as I started to address those things, I started to realize, I just wasn't 100% happy. And I didn't quite realize it or have the words to articulate it at the time. So then I can go and fix that. I can actually go and improve my life. And lo and behold, I'm not looking around for food to do things all the time. Now, that wasn't the end of the emotional eating, but that made a huge difference. Does that make sense? Now, before we go on to number three, reason number three as to why I struggle to lose fat, have we got some comments? Ryan, what's your take on Beyond Meat alternatives? Most of them are utter junk. Truth be told, sadly, most of them are utter junk. I mean, it's product by product dependent. You'll find some that are better than others, but I would say most of them are utter junk. I think the value they do have is in helping people transition, people that have got this very, I think it's a bit ludicrous to be honest, but people that have got this very strong story of, oh, I need that meaty taste, or I like the texture, or or maybe just to give them a simple option. I think they can be a good thing to help people transition to eating more whole foods, but really that's my stance. I think what is best, what's changed my life, is to eat as many whole foods as possible. And so some of these vegan junky products, some of these vegan alternative substitutes, let's say, they're utter trash. Truth be told, I'm gonna call it how it is, and use very direct language on it. I think they are utter trash. It's product by product dependent, right? You know, I go into Waitrose and they probably sell something like, I've not seen one in there, but I'm sure they sell something like a butternut squash burger or something like that, or maybe some falafels. Well, these are technically processed foods, or they might be considered alternatives, right? But they're probably far more clean than something like a Beyond Meat or an Impossible Burger. Makes sense? So it is, sorry, I need to blow my nose, folks. I might disappear in a second to go and do it before I come back and do the third point. But it is product dependent, but generally, a lot of these alternatives they're nasty, you know, terrible in terms of caloric density, very little fiber content, the oils, the fat content, all the other nasties thrown in there, the other chemicals. These are no good. These are no good. How funny. I was just thinking to myself, I have got to stop overeating. Well, I hope this was very timely. Number 3. I didn't mean to almost be going for an hour here. I thought this was going to be a half an hour stream. I've got to go and speak to my clients shortly, so we'll wrap this on up quickly. I said this was coming. If you've been watching the whole time, you know what this is. Booze. A reason why I struggled to lose fat was alcohol. Now, this really largely applies to my first year of university. Since then, have never been a massive drinker, I'm very glad to say. That's never been a major issue for me. But my first year of university, when I first started getting in the gym, I first trying to bulk up a little bit, I dare say I would have gained a lot less fat than I did if I wasn't partying so much. We were going out, me and my friends, at least for the first couple of months at university. Not only was this a nightmare in the old overdraft, but health-wise, we were going out twice a week at least. And this involved for me, in true British fashion, sadly, lots of beers. Lots of beers, and then maybe a few of those disgusting shots type things. Jack Daniels and Cokes and what shots are they? Apple sours was all the rage back then. Cheap student-like shots. And sambucas and tequilas, they're probably a little less budget friendly. But certainly things like apple sours, cheap studenty deals where you get 2 shots for £2 or something like that. And so we'd buy loads. And this is just awful. You know, not only is alcohol incredibly toxic, frankly poison for the old system, but you know, that's from a health and wellness perspective. It's awful for you. Strongly advise you to keep away from it. Not only that, but you can think from a fat loss perspective, all the excess calories, and then that's very directly all the excess calories. Indirectly, the way it compromises your sleep, hormonally, metabolically, the cravings that you then get, you know, the way it drops your inhibitions. You just think, screw it, I'll eat whatever I want. The next day, not feeling so razor sharp, probably not being able to push myself in my workouts as much because I was hungover. Both directly and indirectly, alcohol is one of the worst things you can put in your body if you're trying to lose fat right now. And so for me, that's one of the biggest things I could do. So going from second and third year and then out into the world of work, I drank far less every year, progressively more and more, far less alcohol. And I dare say this had a huge effect on the number on the scale actually finally moving for me when it did. If I'd still been partying outside of university, I think I'd have still lost weight. Thanks to this incredible approach to nutrition, because I got lots of other habits together. Even if I was partying loads and drinking lots of alcohol after uni, I think I would have still lost weight. But I do not think I would have got lean, and I don't think it would have been healthy for me. I think I'd have lost maybe 10, 20 pounds, but I don't think I'd be where I am at today, which is, not to sound braggadocious, I don't have a fantastic physique, but I'm happy, I'm proud of where I am today. I don't think I'd be able to get to like 13, 14, 15% body fat. I don't think I would. I think I'd have a normal looking slim physique in the UK, which that might be better than most people, but it would have limited me. I think the alcohol, it would have created a glass ceiling for me. This is all speculative. It's all hypothetical, and it wasn't as though for me, the minute I got rid of the booze, I started losing weight, because there wasn't a moment where I stopped drinking booze. It just progressively cut down through my university years. I remember in second and third year, I started going out way less. I remember people trying to hassle me. Oh, Ryan, you used to go out so much. Come out with us, come out with us. I already remember my mind being like, no, I'm focused on this health stuff right now. I love going to the gym. I'm trying to build my muscle, and for me, it became very easy to get off alcohol so much, but just progressively, second and third year of university, then going out into the world of work. And now alcohol, how much do I have it? I have it in spurts, but it's in often, frankly, and it's way more measured than it used to be, than that sort of binge drinking culture in the UK that I was engaging in, that's so prevalent, sadly, in the UK, that I was engaging in my student years. And so, like I say, not just the excess calories, but also indirectly, the effect it has on your mood and your hormones and appetite and hunger and cravings and whatnot for the days following. It's just a nightmare. It's utterly terrible for you. So even though there's no point where I suddenly cut out booze and then I can really attribute a sudden drop on the scale to that, I can't conclusively say like dropping booze was the thing that made me break through, but I feel undoubtedly it was a contributing factor there. And even though I still think you can lose weight drinking alcohol, I think you are far better off more widely from a health perspective without it, but also in terms of weight loss as well. It's going to make your journey far more efficient. So I suggest to people watching at home that do like a glass of red wine a couple of times a week, they do party and go to nightclubs on the weekend, I suggest for the coming months, go without. And that's not me saying you can never party again. Don't do that thing where you blame me and you think, oh, Ryan's taking it away from me. Absolute nonsense. It's your choice to do it. You do whatever on earth you like, of course. But I strongly advise you to have a period of sacrifice where you go without alcohol. And, after university, there were periods where I went 6 months without alcohol. There were periods where I went 3 or 4 months without eating out. And the reason why I'm saying this is, even though I probably did those things slightly excessively and I didn't need to be quite so Puritan, I didn't need to abstain quite as much as I did for the results that I got. Looking back, I probably did it not too excessively. There's no such thing as too excessively in terms of healthy eating, but you get what I mean. I did it to a degree that was probably unnecessary. But I'm so grateful for those times, because it taught me abstinence. It taught me, oh, you don't need booze. You don't need junk food. Like, you're really good in yourself, Ryan, and you don't need all these external things. Like, life is good and you're not hooked on these things. And that's, it's very, I could easily now go without alcohol for the rest of the year, and that would be no problem for me whatsoever. And that's because of my habits and because of my beliefs that I've instilled in myself in recent years. But it's also because of the lifestyle setup I've got. I'm not friends with people that party loads. My friends are into, kickboxing or tennis, or my acquaintances online, that many of whom I've met in person, like, Georgie Boy, and, George is vegan and super into this stuff. George hardly drinks. And it's just, George and I went to Texas. We had one alcoholic beverage. We had one alcoholic beverage one night. That was it. And we didn't even want more. We just had that. And we were like, yeah, that's fine. That's my fill. On a 2-week vacation, we were working the entire time. But some people, they would look at that and they would go, you're on a 2-week vacation? Didn't you party? Didn't you have booze? Didn't you want to go to nightclubs in Texas? Not even remotely. Not even remotely. And that's number one, because of me. But two, I'm around people now that don't really party and they don't like doing that stuff, whereas that was the culture at university. And maybe that's a fourth and final tip here. I've given my big 3 reasons, but environment is a fourth and final bonus tip here. Who you hang around with, they can enable your bad food choices. They can encourage your bad food choices. The environments that you're in can enable and encourage your bad food choices. So just be very mindful of those. That is it, folks. Hopefully you can take these 3 things and they'll be of some use to you in your journey in losing body fat and getting in the shape that you want to here. Hopefully this was helpful. Plenty of other free advice, of course, here on this channel, and also my second backup channel, The Slim Vegan. Just type in The Slim Vegan. You can go and subscribe there, posting very regularly there as well as here nowadays. And obviously more on my Instagram Instagram, which is simply at Ryan Adams UK. You can interact with me there. But if you do want more personalized help and support from me, and you want me to hold your feet to the fire, provide that accountability, encouragement, positive pressure, maybe some tough love that you might well be missing right now, if you want me to design your meal plan to give you the precise calories that you need to not only lose a sustainable amount of weight week on week, but also to feel full and satisfied, eating generously portioned but simple plant-based meals, well, give me a shout over at veganslimandsustain.com. I'll put the link down below as well, but simply type in veganslimandsustain.com. You can learn an awful lot there about an awful lot more there about my coaching program, what I do for my clients, the sort of results they're getting right now, plenty of social proof there. This is not just me going, hey, I've got a really cool coaching program, guys. I would like to say when you visit veganslimandsustain.com, when you hear what my clients have got to say for yourself, I would like to think that that speaks volumes more so than me just saying, hey, Vegan Slim and Sustain is the best program. No, there's other people saying just that. So check out veganslimandsustain.com if you want my personal help and support. 75 days, I believe, today until the end of the year. I Googled that earlier, by the way, just incidentally. It's not as though I just calculated that in my, middle of October, 75 days. It's 75 days, I think, until the end of the year. And this is when most people squander their health. They stay inside and they wrap up, and they've got this story about Halloween and Thanksgiving, perhaps if you're in the US, and Christmas time, and they joke and they meme themselves about winter weight gain. Oh, I always put on a few pounds at winter. Let's not conform to that utter nonsense. Let's go against the grain here, and let's finish this year strong with a bang. And there's no reason why many of you can't lose 15, 20 pounds before the end of the year. So if you want me to ensure that you actually get there rather than you trying to figure it all out for yourself, as I say, I hope this video was useful. But anyone actually wants the guarantee of results to ensure that they're doing everything possible to finish the year strongly and lose some fat at the time where everyone accepts that they're going to get out of shape and in terrible nick health-wise. If you want to be counter to that, go to veganslimandsustain.com. You can learn more about my program. Okay, thanks, folks, for all your time. I enjoyed this. Better go in preparation for some client meetings. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Speak soon-ish, I'm sure. Bye.